One March 5th, 1770, a cold winter night in Boston. The air was filled with tension, anger, and fear. Just a few moments later, gunshots would ring out, and 5 men would lie dead in the snow. This was the Boston Massacre, one of the most pivotal events leading to the American Revolution. But what really happened that night? And why did this tragic event push the American colonies closer to war with Britain? Stay with us as we uncover the full story of the Boston Massacre. To understand the Boston Massacre, we have to go back a few years. The 1760s were a time of great unrest in the American colonies. Britain had just fought a costly war, the 7 Years' War, against France. To recover from its financial losses, the British government imposed heavy taxes on the colonies. One of the most controversial taxes was the Townshend Acts of 1767, which placed duties on everyday goods like tea, glass, and paper. The colonists, who had no representation in the British Parliament, were outraged. Their slogan became famous: "No taxation without representation." Boston, in particular, became a hotbed of resistance. The British government responded by sending troops to keep order. By 1768, nearly 2,000 British soldiers were stationed in the city, an intimidating presence for a population of only about 15,000 people. But rather than maintaining peace, the presence of soldiers only made tensions worse. Soldiers and colonists frequently clashed in the streets. Fights broke out over small disputes. Many Bostonians saw the soldiers as oppressors, while the soldiers, many of whom were underpaid and resented their posting, saw the colonists as troublemakers. The stage was set for a disaster. Then came the fateful night of March 5th, 1770. It all started outside the Customs House on King Street, now known as State Street in modern Boston. A young apprentice named Edward Garrick insulted a British soldier, Private Hugh White. Words turned to shouts. Shouts turned to threats. Soon a crowd of angry colonists gathered around, taunting the lone soldier. They threw snowballs, ice, and even oyster shells. As tensions escalated, more British soldiers arrived, led by Captain Thomas Preston. Now there were 8 armed redcoats facing a growing crowd of around 300 angry Bostonians. The scene was chaotic. Some colonists dared the soldiers to fire. Others struck the soldiers with clubs and sticks. In the confusion, Private Hugh Montgomery was hit and slipped on the ice. As he got up, he fired his musket. The other soldiers, confused and afraid, fired into the crowd. When the smoke cleared, 5 men lay dead or dying in the street. The victims of the Boston Massacre became martyrs for the colonial cause. The most famous among them was Crispus Attucks, a former enslaved man of African and Native American descent. He was the first to die, becoming a symbol of American resistance. The others who lost their lives that night were James Caldwell, Patrick Carr, Samuel Gray, Samuel Maverick. Their deaths sent shockwaves throughout the colonies, who created a powerful engraving depicting the British as brutal murderers. The colonial press used the event as propaganda to fuel anti-British sentiment. In the weeks that followed, Captain Thomas Preston and the British soldiers were arrested and put on trial for murder. But here's something many people don't know. Their defense attorney was none other than John Adams, the future 2nd President of the United States. Adams was a staunch patriot, but he believed in the right to a fair trial. He argued that the soldiers had acted in self-defense, fearing for their lives. In the end, 6 soldiers were acquitted and 2 were convicted of manslaughter, receiving only minor punishments. The verdict angered many colonists, but it also showed that even in times of conflict, the idea of justice and the rule of law remained important to the revolutionaries. The Boston Massacre didn't start the American Revolution overnight, but it deepened the divide between Britain and the colonies. Over the next 5 years, tensions would continue to rise, leading to the Boston Tea Party, the Intolerable Acts, and eventually the battles of Lexington and Concord in 1775. What started as a street brawl in Boston became a defining moment in American history, a symbol of resistance against tyranny. The Boston Massacre was more than just a tragic event. It was a turning point, a moment when ordinary people stood against oppression. Their sacrifice helped spark a revolution that would change the world. What do you think? Was the Boston Massacre an unavoidable tragedy or a deliberate step toward independence? Let us know in the comments below, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more deep dives into American history.